Ladies and gentlemen. Oh my God. Oh shit. Did you see that? I just saw the thought of the day flash before my eyes. Can we start like a trending hashtag? Like hashtag pray for the thought of the day. Right? What is going on? It is Sunday. It is the 16th of July. And we are here. We are chilling in my car. And lately, I've been cleaning up the old hard drive. And usually, when I'm deleting a bunch of porn, you can expect a thought of the day. And today's thought of the day is about a story. And real quick, pro tip, if you're still downloading porn in 2017, then I need you to start streaming, okay? But today's thought of the day is about a story that I've shared in the past before, but I feel like it bears repeating. It's a story about a father, his son, and their donkey. And so, thousands of years ago, in a place in the far, far east, there was once a father, his son, and their donkey. And this father and his son decided that they wanted to go into the local town in order to sell their goods at a local market. So this father and his son get all their goods together and they put them in a burlap sack. And they take this heavy burlap sack and they hitch this sack onto the donkey. And now with the father on top of the donkey and his son walking alongside of him, they start to move in the direction of the town. As they're moving in the direction of the town, they see two people who are walking in the opposite direction. And as they pass these two people, the father can hear them say some things under their breath. But the father can make out what they're saying. And the father hears them say, "What kind of father rides on top of the donkey and makes his poor son walk? Like he's strong." So the father hears this, and in response, he jumps off the donkey and puts his son atop the donkey. And they continue to move in the direction of the town. As they're walking, they see two more people walking in the opposite direction. And as they pass, the father hears them say some stuff under their breath. And the father hears them say, "What kind of son disrespects his father in his old age by riding on the donkey? He's in the prime of his life." The father hears this. And in response, he takes his son off the donkey. And now they're both walking alongside the donkey in the direction of the town. And now they see a few more people pass. And as they pass, the father hears them say some stuff under their breath. And he hears them say, "Look at these two jokers. They got a fucking donkey and nobody rides it." So he hears this, and in response, he gets on top of the donkey and he puts his son on the donkey with him. And they move in the direction of the town. Once again, they see a few more people who are passing them. And as they pass them, they hear them say, "Animal cruelty. Like, don't these two guys know that that's way too much weight for this poor donkey? Have these two ever heard of animal rights?" So these two get off the donkey. The father gets off and the son gets off the donkey. And now they find a pole that they chop down and they take the donkey by the hooves, tie it up, and now they're shouldering this donkey on this pole into town, right? So they get to the town and they have to cross a bridge in order to get to the market. But because this bridge was poorly made, the father and the son lose their footing and they fall into this river, this sweeping current under the bridge, and they lose everything. Now, before we talk about this story, I want to share with you, this story is actually an Aesop's fable. Aesop's fables were like Greek oratorical traditions, like storytelling back in the day, like 600 BC by a guy named Aesop's. And there are two really big takeaways from this story. The first one is, you can't please all the people all the time. But the second, less obvious takeaway is, social pressure triggers fear. Social pressure triggers fear. And that's what I want to talk about with you tonight. So, I want you to think about this. Now, when I'm talking about social pressure, that really has to do with people. But it doesn't necessarily have to do with just people. It could be family too. When I'm talking about how this has to do with people, I'm talking about like the perception that other people may have of you, or maybe the perception that you have of other people, right? And your perception of what other people think about you. So when I say this has to do with people, but it also has to do with family, if I were to ask you, do you have someone negative in your family that tears you down? What would you say? Because if you're like me, then you would probably say yes. Like you have someone in your family who's very negative and who tears you down. And it may be indirect, it may be not on purpose, right? But we all have someone like that in our families. Now, here's what I want you to think about. I want to know if you're thinking deeper. I want to know if you're thinking scientifically about this. Do you have someone from like 10,000 years ago who may be tearing you down? Because if you're like me and you're like everybody else in the world, then the answer is yes. And here's why. So when I said that social pressure triggers fear, here's what I mean by that. When you and I were kids, right? And we did something that prompted other people to laugh at us, you know what that did? That produced fear. Because, see, 10,000 years ago, back when we were hunter-gatherers in this sort of civilization, we actually cared about what other people's opinions were of us. And if we were in a position where other people had a low opinion of us, that was bad. Because that means that if the majority has a low opinion of you and I get to go sleep where the lions are, and the tigers are, and the panthers are. And when there are predators nearby, you're not going to get alarmed. We're not going to get warned so that we can save our own skins. That's why these fears are produced. That's why that we feel the fear when we think about what other people think about us. Now, this is kind of oversimplified, but I want you to apply it to the modern world. Now, that was when we were kids, but now think about, like, if you have a decision you want to make, right? Or if you have maybe a relationship that you want to get out of because maybe it's a toxic relationship or something. If you have a job that you want to quit because you want to go do something, you want to take a risk, you know what's happening at a cellular level? You know what's happening at the DNA level? There's a whisper in your head. There's a whisper in my head. And you know what that whisper is saying? It's a whisper from 10,000 years ago. It's your great-great-great-great-great-grandfather. It's your great-great-great-great-grandmother. And you know what they're saying to you? And you know what they're saying to me? We have a steady supply of food. We have some raw materials, and they're coming in consistently. We have security. We have predictability. If we make this decision to go over there, to move away from this circle, this pack, this relationship, we don't know what's over there. We don't know if there are supermarkets. We don't know if there's other people. We don't know if there's GPS. We don't know if there's a steady supply of food and materials. We could die. And it's not really like a whisper, like you don't hear it. It's not a whisper, but it's like an urge that we feel. It's like it just like happens, and like we get this feeling, and we freeze up, and we don't make a decision. We don't do it. You know why? Because we're like, I'm not going to do something like that's totally apart from the group. I'm not going to do something that's risky. I'm not going to swim upstream because people will say stuff about me. And that goes back to the father and the son. Every time he did something to adjust, it was like, oh my God, people are saying stuff about me. And that's what's going on. Now, here's the thing. Is there like a science behind this? Well, the answer is yes. And that's what I want to share with you tonight. Now, reading a book, one of my favorite books actually, it's called Social by Matthew Lieberman, a UCLA professor. I don't know if you can see that, but it's kind of bright. And it's about why our brains are wired to connect. And it's about what we do in social dynamics and in group dynamics. So he talks about in this book how there's a place in our brains, there's a part of our brains called the amygdala. And the amygdala is the emotional center of our brains. The amygdala is responsible for producing the physiological responses to fear, kind of like the sweating, the palms, the increase in heart rate, the dilation of the pupils. All these things happen at the amygdala. Now, what I'm trying to tell you and what I'm trying to kind of convey is that because this fear, these things in the amygdala served a purpose for us 10,000 years ago, that doesn't necessarily mean they're serving the same purpose for us today. In fact, the amygdala today has gone fucking nuts. And here's why. Today in the modern world, you and I are connected all the time, 24/7. And when we're connected with social media, with this medium, with Facebook, Instagram, all these things, Snapchat, that means that we're always being watched. Like, we're always being watched and observed. And when we're being watched and observed, that influences our decision making. Now, if I were to ask you, does fear sometimes dominate your decision making? And if you were brutally honest, if I'm brutally honest with myself, I know for a fact that fear dominates my decision making sometimes. But here's the real question. This is what we're trying to get at here. How do you stop fear from dominating your decision making? Well, I'm here to share with you something that's not like pseudoscience. It's a real thing. It's what's called fear annihilation. And that's what Matt Lieberman talks about in Social. Fear annihilation, or exposure therapy. What does that mean? Well, basically, it's like, here, another oversimplified sort of explanation with fear. So we have the amygdala, right? The amygdala in our brains, when we think about situations where we've been hurt, or maybe situations that cause fear and stress, and maybe depression, right? When I think back, everything I talk about, it centers around these four pillars of the good life, right? So I talk a lot about the four pillars of eudaimonia. This is something that the ancient Greek philosophers, they talked about and taught. So in order to achieve a great life, we got to master the areas of health, wealth, love, and happiness. So when you think about, like, say for example, you want to get in shape, right? But when you think about getting in shape, the memories that come forth are like memories like, oh man, I tried before and like it was hard and it was stressful and I didn't see results and it was a waste of time. And that's fear, because if you're weighing the options and you say no to something like, I'm gonna get back in shape, you're basically saying that I fear losing time. That's what you're saying. Again, so that's health, wealth, right? I started my own business that I told you about. If you had a previous experience where you took a risk, you spent a lot of money, I spent a lot of money just getting my startup going, right? And if you've done that before and it didn't work out, you lost a lot of money, you're gonna be like, oh, I tried that before, or I had a business partner before and it didn't work out and I lost a lot of money. Again, fear, that's a fear-based decision. You're gonna be like, no, I'm not gonna do that again. So health, wealth, let's talk about love, right? If you're listening to this and you got a pulse, you've been rejected, I've been rejected before. And when we think about dating and like getting back into like, maybe you want to go and strike some new relationships or friendships. If you've been rejected more times than you've been accepted, you're going to think about that. And you're going to be like, no, I'm not going to do that again. Why would I do that and hurt myself again? You see where I'm getting at? So what fear annihilation is doing, or exposure therapy is doing, is it's basically, you're creating new memories. So like if for example, you were bit by a dog as a kid, like that's gonna affect you when you see dogs. Like when you see a dog out and about and you were affected by maybe a dog as a child, you're gonna get a little bit more of a cortisol release. Like it's gonna affect your brain and your decision making. You're gonna get a little bit more afraid. But it's like if you get around dogs more and you're kind of like in a place where you can put better memories on top of those bad memories, that's what fear annihilation is. And we actually do this in the military for people who come back from war zones, who have PTSD, post-traumatic stress disorder. We put them in positions, we do things where we can expose them to the fears, expose them to what it is that's making them kind of like have a reaction. And if you do it enough, it'll pretty much kill the fear, right? So I'll give you an example. In this book, Matt Lieberman talks about how these experiments they did with mice, these mice, they were exposed to an electric shock, which was uncomfortable. And this shock prompted them to produce fear, the sweating, the heart rate, all that stuff. And then as they shocked them, they would play music. So now they combined this shock with another stimulus, which was the music. And every time they shocked them, they'd hear the music. And then after a while, all they would have to do was play the music, and then the mice would produce those feelings of fear. They wouldn't even shock them. They would just play the music, and they would just react the same way that they would react after getting shocked. So, fear annihilation, they would just play the music without the shock, and play the music without the shock, and play the music more, until eventually the music didn't cause them to react. And there's a reason for that. See, he talks about in this book how, like, when you and I are confronted with situations that cause the amygdala to produce fear, the amygdala actually, before it actually produces the fear, it goes from one part of your brain, from the amygdala, to what's called the MPFC, which is the medial prefrontal cortex. So it goes from the MPFC, or it goes from the amygdala to the MPFC, and it checks the MPFC if there are any better memories of the things that we're being faced with. So if, like, you think about dating, you think about losing the weight or whatever, and you go to the MPFC and there are some good memories of the dating, or the dogs, remember we talked about the dogs? Your brain is going to shoot back over to the amygdala, and it's literally going to annihilate or kill the fear. So, fear annihilation, what do you and I have to do? Well, we basically have to put ourselves in a position where we're killing the fear. Here's another example. So I read about how the Amish, the rural community back in the States, they actually they don't have cars, electricity. They use like horse and buggy to get around. And the way the Amish, they train their horses is like, what they do when they have like a brand new horse, like a baby horse, horses, where they come from, and like their 10,000-year-old grandparents, when their 10,000-year-old grandparents heard a loud sound, that was like thunder or like a predator, and that meant danger, and they would just run away. It's called going shy. You never want a horse to go shy, because if you were riding on that horse alongside a road and it heard a big tractor trailer, a truck coming along, and it went shy, that horse could pull you into traffic, and that's a pretty shitty way to die. So what the Amish would do is they would literally chain horses to the sides of busy highways, and these horses, they would hear these trucks pass by, all like for a couple hours a day, for like 30, 60 days. They would just hear the trucks. And eventually, because of that exposure therapy, it's like the horse doesn't even hear the sound anymore. So after they do this and the fear has been annihilated, now that horse can walk alongside a busy interstate or highway and not be affected by this truck that might be passing by. And if you kind of apply that to the modern world and you and I, when you and I are confronted with like situations that cause fear, if you and I were to just like stay the course, right? Just like the calm horse after the fear has been annihilated, if you and I would just stay the course, that is all we really needed, right? But you and I, we're always like pulling ourselves into traffic when something comes up. So what am I proposing for you and I to do? Well, if you got a fear of public speaking, if you got a fear of social situations, if you got a fear of maybe losing money, I'm literally telling you to shock yourself and then play the music. Get around the music of public speaking. Get around the music of working out. Get around people in social situations. Whenever you're prompted with a situation to go out and be around people, I'm telling you, we should create new memories to cover up the ones that are not serving us. Because that's exactly how you annihilate the fear. Do you see what I'm saying? What I'm getting at? So it's like we have to literally chain ourselves like the horse to the fear, if that makes sense. So, Fear Annihilation, Social by Matt Lieberman. That's really all I got tonight. I hope that was a golden nugget for you, and I hope that I've taken you, right, from the sweeping current of your own life, and I've put you back on solid ground. Because you don't need to be like the father, the son, and their donkey being swept away by social pressure and the fear that it triggers. Ladies and gentlemen, we are here. We are chilling in my car, and we're just singing like the birds sing. Not worried about who hears or what they think. Remember, hey, if I have to, I'm going to start a Kickstarter for this light. Like, if this light goes out, that's no bueno, right? Until next time, be well, be healthy. I will talk with you soon.